What's up, good people? So, today I want to talk about a very interesting recent report about the connection between the salt intake and mortality. By mortality, I mean the death rate. And it has been found that, salt intake has been causing approximately 5 million deaths every year worldwide. That's a huge number, and most of it comes from cardiovascular mortality because hypertension. Hypertension is the result of high salt intake. Salt intake is something that could be hidden salt or something that could be an obvious salt intake. And that's what this paper is talking about, that problem comes from the hidden salt. There is a salt that we are aware of, but if you are taking processed food, you don't know that how much salt you're even consuming on a day-to-day basis, and that's gonna create a lot of problems. And that's what this paper is all about, and I wanted to bring it forward to all of you so that you guys reduce the salt intake. Even I used to take a lot of salt. Now I am trying to reduce it as much as possible. Salt is a necessity also, so it has benefits as well, and we can discuss about that in the future. But at this point, I want to tell that reduction of salt intake is in your favor. Okay, and basically it's a death, cardiovascular disease associated death that we are talking about here, and that's something that you need to be very, very careful about. And how was it proven that we are causing so many deaths because of salt intake? They did a huge study. Look at that. It's like 501,379. It's like 500,000 people that were studied in this study, and they followed them through. And what they found out in this research, in this study, was that for cause specific mortality, they found out that the higher frequency of adding salt to the food was significantly associated with higher risk of cardiovascular disease mortality and cancer mortality. So it's not just a cardiovascular thing. Salt has been connected to cancer related deaths as well. So that's why you need to be careful about your salt intake, and that's why I'm bringing it here, that we need to be cautious about our intake and have some preventive measures before the things are out of our control. And researchers noticed that adding the salt directly is something that you have your long-term preference for salty food and habitual salt intake. And if this is a long-term preference, then the things go worse and things can have a bad impact on you. And that's why even in 2010 they found out 1.65 million deaths were caused by anybody who had 2.0 grams of sodium per day. So that's something concerning. That's something that we all need to be careful and cautious about, because we have a thing called salt sensitivity, and some people are more sensitive to salt intake compared to others. And therefore, the research says that you might be somebody who is going to respond aggressively to salt intake, even if it is lesser than 3 to 5 grams per day salt intake. So that is why you need to be extremely cautious about your salt intake to reduce the risk of mortality. And when it comes to mortality, the cardiovascular mortality that we found out from this research was premature mortality. By that, it means that you could have survived that cardiovascular attack if you were not a salt intake person who would take so much salt every day that that's beyond the recommended salt intake on a daily basis. So that's why there is a positive correlation between salt intake and mortality, and that's what this research proves actually. And so, what's the alternative? The alternative is you can replace some of the sodium chloride in the regular salt with potassium chloride. Potassium is quite healthy to your heart. So, that can avoid the harmful effects of sodium in the salt. And that's what you can do. And in order to study that kind of thing, they did a big trial research where they studied 200,000 people. Okay, and that's a huge study from 600 villages in the rural China, and that's what they discovered, that you can reduce the cardiovascular events, you can reduce the stroke, you can reduce the mortality, you can reduce the premature mortality by having salt alternatives in your diet. So let's say if you are having salt craving, you should find something in the market that still feels salty, tastes salty, but doesn't have sodium chloride in it. Okay, so be careful. Don't substitute potassium straightforward with sodium chloride, because that can lead to hyperkalemia, and that has its own problems. But the thing is, the rate of serious adverse effects attributed to hyperkalemia was not significantly higher, according to this study, with the salt substitution than the regular salt. So the point that we interpret from here is, you can reduce the rate of stroke, you can reduce the cardiovascular events, you can reduce the premature deaths from cardiovascular events by alternative resources, by substituting your sodium chloride with something that contains a little bit of acceptable potassium, and salty taste, and still enjoy the food. So you have to be careful in those things, and be very diligent when you're doing your groceries, and study these things and follow through these things, so that you don't fall into the trap of hypertension, because hypertension is the killer. So there is a direct correlation between salt intake and mortality, and that's what I'm highlighting in this study. That's what we need to be careful about, and that's what we need to be cautious about, so that we don't fall into that trap, so that we can live longer, and we don't have that premature mortality that is caused by this kind of diet and lifestyle. So if you have any questions, please ask me in the comment section. Like, subscribe, and share to my channel. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye bye.